Well, thank you very much, Lisa. I'm delighted to be back in Spring Lake. We've had several programs that we've offered together, and it's always a pleasure to come back to your delightful community. I think could we turn down the house mic just a little bit, or it seems a little bit loud, like it's right on the edge of starting to scream at us. If you have any problems with my first name, Gleaves, you're not alone. About a year ago, I was at a professional meeting, and it just so happened that my birthday coincided with the meeting. And so my buddies wanted to surprise me, and what they ended up doing was they went to a cake maker, and they took instructions, and they said, this is going to be Gleaves' birthday, so say, congratulations, Gleaves. And so they're just about to pack up and leave, and the cake maker said, wait, before you leave, is Gleaves a man or a woman? He said, Gleaves is a man. So that night, I get to the party, the surprise party for me, and they wheel out the cake. It was all nicely covered and everything. And I say, ta-da! And on the cake it said, congratulations, Gleaves is a man. People have had trouble with my name from day one. So anyway, as I say, I'm delighted to be here with you. And what I wanted to talk about is something that a lot of people have wondered about. It's this phenomenon, Abraham Lincoln is so compelling a figure, and he has remained particularly compelling in 2009 for two reasons. First of all, it's his bicentennial of his birth, and so a lot of people have been curious about what it was about his life that always puts him in the top 3 of the presidential rankings. Why does he stay there? The second reason is our current president, Barack Obama, also looks back at Abraham Lincoln as an extremely compelling character. So what is it? What's the combination there? Well, I think some of the answer is quite apparent. If you look at Lincoln's career, if you look at his impact on American history, here's a man, obviously, who goes through the American Iliad, the Civil War, and is able to, without firing the first shot, he was determined not to start the war, but was able to keep the Union together. He fought initially for Union, but then, of course, as the war went on, this is a tendency of American presidents. You'll see this if you study the presidents. You'll see that when they get into a war, if it's not a quick war, they have to find bigger and bigger reasons for all the bloodshed. And so as the war went on, Lincoln adopted not just Union as a cause, but also the emancipation of the slaves. And then by pushing the 13th Amendment in 1864 and 1865 successfully before he was assassinated, the Union had this transcendent cause now to be fighting for freedom. So Lincoln helped define the American experience in that way. This would be very compelling to subsequent presidents, including Barack Obama. Also, Lincoln did something critically important, and if we have time, we'll get to it later in the talk tonight. Lincoln was able to take one word in the Declaration of Independence, and put a whole new gloss on that word, reinterpret that word, so that it would guide our understanding of freedom. And we'll get to that word. The word is equal, but we'll get back to it, and we'll unpack its meaning in the way that Lincoln unpacked it. Many other reasons that Lincoln is compelling, but I think for people like Barack Obama and so many other Americans, ultimately it comes back. This man, I'm going to use a word that's become so overused now, it's almost a cliche, but it's a good word. He has become iconic. The log cabin origins all the way to the White House. How does somebody do that? Now let's put this in perspective. And to put it in perspective, I want to use Booker T. Washington's famous quotation. Booker T. Washington pointed out the measure of a human being, the measure of that person's career, is not just how many accolades they receive in life, but how many obstacles they overcome to get where they get in life. That's the true measure of a person's character. Now, it's one thing if you start life out in the gentry class, as George Washington did, and rise from being gentry and go to the White House, especially if you've gone through commanding the Continental Army and being unanimously selected to preside over the Constitutional Convention. You start on a fairly high platform. If you're Benjamin Harrison, your grandfather, William Henry Harrison, was president. If you're John Quincy Adams, your father, John Adams, was president. If you're George W. Bush, your father, George H.W. Bush, was president. It's one thing to start out life on the road to the White House here. And this is not to denigrate the achievements of any of those individuals. But it's one thing to start here and go to the White House. It's quite another to start down here, all the way. I mean all the way at the bottom, and rise to the White House. And I'll explain, we'll unpack this idea of being at the bottom here. I want to go over with you 5 obstacles that Abraham Lincoln had to overcome, even to position himself to run for the White House. The first obstacle was geographic isolation. You've got to take yourself back to the world of 1809. You know, prior to 1809, the energy, the power to civilization, the power that we use to live was essentially the same as the power that cavemen had used. The steam engine is the energy source that finally changes and makes possible a true industrial revolution. 1809, this is only a few years after George Washington's out of office. If you want to get someplace in 1809, you basically have to do it the way people did it 30,000 years before. You have to walk. Maybe you can take some kind of vessel that floats. Eventually you domesticate the horse. But that's about it. If you're in another part of the world, the camel. But you were isolated. If you were in Kentucky, you are a long way away when you're in that frontier outpost from any of the centers of power, much less the White House. So Abraham Lincoln has to overcome this sense of geographic isolation. He does it very smartly in the course of his career. He wants to read the law. He becomes a lawyer, doesn't go to a law school. There weren't law schools in those days. You read with lawyers. He wants to become a lawyer. He moves then to Springfield, the capital. He helped, in fact, he got into the state legislature and he helped move the capital to Springfield. So it'd be close to his home. So he moves to a place where he will be dealing with the coinage, of the currency of power, communicating with Washington, D.C. He's very smart in overcoming his isolation because what does he do as a lawyer? He becomes a circuit writer in Illinois' largest geographic circuit. So he's out and about, going all over the state to hear cases. We'll come back to that in a bit. And finally, he goes about the state in pursuit of political office. First, those 7 locales to do the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Gets him known all over Illinois. But then he starts going on the lecture tours. He even goes to Bleeding, Kansas in the 1850s. He goes to Bleeding, Kansas. How many of you knew that Lincoln had gone to Kansas? Hardly anybody I talked to knows that. He goes to Kansas. He takes speaking tours up to New York and to New England and gives some of his famous speeches in his campaign outside of Illinois. So he overcomes geographic isolation. He's helped, of course, by the fact that there are railroads now. So he has to overcome this wilderness experience out here in Kentucky and Indiana and then Illinois. The second obstacle he has to overcome is the fact that he has no formal schooling. He doesn't have the educational credential that we expect of the most basic citizen nowadays. Abraham Lincoln said that his schooling amounted to 1 year at an ABC school where he learned to reckon, read, write, and reckon to the rule of 3. That was about it. You had to go to just enough school so you could protect yourself in the marketplace when you're making contracts with people. They just knew how to sort of do basic math. That was it. And yet, Lincoln became one of the most educated, the least schooled, but the most educated president in U.S. history.